Your Humanities Half Hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.
Hapadays and Taro, welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry. In the months leading up to the Northern Mariana Islands 2020 midterm election, and in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, the Northern Marianas Humanities Council launched a survey among residents to examine media literacy, media use and perceptions, and civic attitudes. And the result of that survey are being presented today in a report called Minagahet, Ellet, Reporting the Truth in the Northern Mariana Islands. And our guests today are Executive Director Leo Pangelinan of the Northern Marianas Humanities Council and Francis S. Dalisay, PhD and Associate Professor of Communication and Journalism at the University of Guam. Leo, maybe you could start us off with why did the council undertake this survey and what did they hope would be the significance of it to our community?
Sure. We were presented with a funding opportunity back in 2019 out of the Federation of State and Humanities Councils. This is a member advocacy organization at the national level for state and territorial humanities councils. So there's some 56 organizations that can compete for this funding source. And the overarching goal of that, the award project was to examine the essential role that journalism and the humanities play to create an informed citizenry, the foundation of our democracy. And so in our proposal, our goal to align with that was to promote a greater awareness in our community of the importance of the media in the context of our brand of democracy, and a young democracy at that. And, the fact that this is the first of its kind type of study about the use and perceptions and other factors related to the media in our democracy. And quite frankly, we're in our community at the time, and I think to some extent today, there's not a lot of discussion about the importance of the media and types of media and what role does the media play in our community in terms of strengthening our democracy, strengthening our ability as citizens to engage and interact with our democratic processes and our democratic institutions. So the Federation of State Humanities Councils, they were given a grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, another national foundation, who just got off of helping the Federation recognize 100 years of Pulitzer Prize winners. And journalism is a major component in that prize category. And this was sort of a spin-off of that, learning that we really need to examine that relationship between the media and our democracy. And so we went to work after being awarded the grant in February of 2020. A major component of that grant project that we proposed was to develop and disseminate a survey that would help us measure where we're at, because we just have no baseline information about our residents here and their understanding, their awareness, their interaction with the media. And through the process of developing this survey, of course, with the leadership of Dr. Francis Dalisay and a team of advisors, we ended up developing additional dimensions to examine other aspects of the media, as well as aspects that defined our interaction with some of our democratic processes as members of this community. Yeah, in a nutshell, that's really why we decided to do this. And we're excited to report that we have we have completed the study, and it's available in the form of a report. And I think we'll get to how we can access that a little later. But I just wanted to put in a plug for now that this report that has the results of this survey are available online in digital format. But in the next few weeks here, we do plan to print copies of our report and find ways to make that available for those in our community who are interested.
Well, I know one of the things we really want to encourage the listeners to do is actually see a lot of the data in the report, because there's a lot there that we may not be able to cover in this short time. So where can they find it online for now?
So for now, you can go straight to our website, nmhcouncil.org. There's a major menu link there that says programs, and you'll find it under Minagahet Ellet, which is the title of this project. And just for our listeners who don't know Chamorro or Carolinian, Minagahet means truth, and Ellet is the equivalent in Carolinian.
All right. Francis, let's just go straight into how this survey was developed. For example, how many people did we interview to give us an idea of how valid this survey is?
Yeah, sure. So what we did was we first, so I met with Leo initially, and we were sort of brainstorming what type of items and some constructs we wanted to measure. And so what we did was we looked at existing research, like research that has been done in the past. Research has been done in Guam. Some of the surveys that I've run probably for the past 15 years in Guam use some of those measures that are typically assessed in a community survey like this. Sometime, I think it was the summer before we rolled this out, we convened the advisory board, which is provided advice to us and basically screened the items, making sure that they're appropriate to the region and so forth. This was an online survey, and so it was done through an app called Qualtrics. And then so the survey instrument was online, and then when it came time to disseminate it, we rolled it out in the weeks prior or the run up to the 2020 election, and then we had a research assistant helped. We used a method called RDS, which is respondent-driven sampling. It's a method that is used or has been used by some of my colleagues here in Guam and across the Pacific. It's effective in getting a good representation of the community. So we collected a total of 481 completed responses, and this resulted in a completion rate of 73%, which is pretty good, I think, because when you're conducting surveys, you want to balance certain types of errors. Yeah, and the measures that we use have been used in previous research. They're reliable, valid, and we did all these other tests to make sure that the instruments were reliable. And we also, before we rolled out the survey, we did what we call cognitive interviews. I think there were like a few people that we had them do the survey to make sure that they understand the questions and so forth. But yeah, going back to what was on the survey, as Leo said earlier, what we want to do, and probably what we're going to keep saying in this interview, is that we want to get the audience to the report itself, because there's tons of information, there's tons of items that you can look through. And I don't know if we'll be able to cover all those items in just 1 hour here today. That's why. So
maybe we could start off with one of the first questions on the survey, or the first finding, shall we say, in the survey, which I think will be of interest to a lot of people, is what did you find as far as how much the respondents to the survey use media as a source for local news and actually perceive that media to be trustworthy as a source of local news?
So our survey measured how often the respondents use specific sources, media sources, to obtain news about the CNMI. And then the sources we listed include local newspapers, local radio, TV, and a regional online news site. So I think you could say the top news or the sources where they get the top three included the two local newspapers, the Saipan Tribune, Mariana's Variety. And so people were using that a lot, like on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being paying a lot or using it frequently, then the residents were scoring like 3.9 for Saipan Tribune. Mariana's Variety was at 3.85. And that's followed by KSPN Channel 2. So those were the top 3 that the residents were using. And the least used was Mariana's Business Journal. And in terms of trustworthiness, and so the most trustworthy was KSPN. So again, on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the most trustworthy, that's KSPN scored 3.87, followed by Saipan Tribune, 3.82, and then Mariana's Variety, 3.71. So those were the top 3 trustworthy sources. In terms of social media platforms, so Facebook was the most frequently used, followed by WhatsApp, and then followed by YouTube. And then as far as trustworthiness of social media platforms, the most trustworthy was YouTube. The second most trustworthy was Facebook, and then WhatsApp was the third most trustworthy. So those are the results for use and trustworthiness.
What was the one of the things you asked about was how much the respondents felt it was the responsibility, or they would like the local media to cover regional news. In other words, not just Saipan or Tinian Rota, but Guam, Micronesia, the Pacific. What did they have to say about that?
It's a good question. I mean, 84%, or a majority of, for that matter, of our sample said they would like local media to carry more regional news. So there seems to be a high interest in the media, wanting the media to carry regional news. And by the way, this was an item suggested by one of the advisory board members, Tomas Manglonia, right? So he was the one that suggested we measure this.
So 84%, that means there's a pretty strong interest among local readers to read about what's happening in the region in the local news. Okay. There's something you measured called perceived journalistic functions. Can you explain that, and what were the results that you received?
Absolutely. So what we did was we took this notion of the perceived journalistic functions from a study by a former colleague of mine when I used to work at Cleveland State University's School of Communication. And he conceptualized this journalistic functions along 3 dimensions. And the first one being a watchdog for the community. The second one being engaging and developing a sense of community. And the third one being coordinating and socializing the community. So what we found is that the respondents tended to agree that local news media and the CNMI should serve as a watchdog, should engage the community / create a sense of community, and should also coordinate / socialize the community. And as a matter of fact, again, going back on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest here, the respondents that we surveyed are scoring like 4.59, 4.45, 4.42 on these items respectively. And so there is a want, the respondents do want the local media to serve as a watchdog and so forth.
So very strong expectation from the respondents for the media to play those roles. This is your Humanities Half Hour. We'll be back with more after this break.
Northern Marianas Humanities Council bulaguinahanya puri historian Marianas dan kultura. Sinyon soda esisihanan formasyon gi zon mami website nmhcouncil.org pat bisita gi YouTube pat Facebook. Guahalokwi diferentes klasen leblunay sinya un fan. Northern Marianas Humanities Council has uzura todo I experiencia tau-tau.
Welcome back to Your Humanities Half Hour. We are chatting with Executive Director Leo Pangelinan of Northern Marianas Humanities Council and Francis S. Dalisay, PhD and Associate Professor of Communication and Journalism at the University of Guam about the Council's recent report entitled Minagahet, Ellet, Reporting the Truth in the Northern Mariana Islands. Francis, you were mentioning before the break the role that the people expect the media to play in the community, but how news literate are the respondents, did you find, in understanding whether news is fair, for example? What were your findings there?
I think in summary, for the most part, our findings suggest that CNMI residents, they have a satisfactory level of news media literacy, and they also perceive themselves as to be news media literate. I think what we did was we measured news media literacy along certain dimensions. This was through an established scale called the News Media Literacy Scale. And the respondents are scoring, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being, a quality response. Most of the responses are around the 3 and 4 on these items. So they do perceive, or they are media literate in this sense, and they also perceive themselves to be literate. But interestingly, the respondents perceive themselves to be more literate than they actually are, because this scale has measures for objective media literacy, and then self-perceived media literacy. So again, they seem to perceive themselves as more literate than they actually are. Although, again, for the most part, they are scoring pretty good in these measures.
And what about fairness? Do we feel that the media is fair?
In terms of fairness, so there's an item that asks respondents, like, to what extent do you agree with the statement, I think news media are fair? On this item, the mean score on a scale of 1 to 5 was a 2.79, with 1 being not fair and 5 being very fair, right? So it just sort of tells you there that they don't believe the news media are fair, or as fair as they should be, I guess.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about a slightly different angle the survey also looked at, which was in relation to politics. Most of the respondents were voters, but as I understand, not necessarily indirectly involved in political activities, correct? Right?
Yes.
Okay. So how much were they interested in politics, satisfied with politics, and trusting the election process in the Northern Marianas?
First, our findings suggest that on average, respondents were neither interested nor uninterested in politics.
So kind of neutral.
Yeah, sort of neutral. But we also focused on four areas of what is called political disaffection. And these are areas or constructs such as political efficacy, which is like how confident are you in that your vote makes a difference. You measured cynicism, skepticism, and apathy. I think taken together, the findings suggest that respondents were fairly skeptical about information they received regarding local politics and politicians. Being skeptical is actually a good thing when it comes to political information and news. And although they tended to be slightly cynical, they were not at a point of giving up or being apathetic toward the local political process. And that's reflected in the scores that you can read on the report. However, I mentioned political efficacy earlier. Regarding political efficacy, respondents neither disagreed nor agreed that they were confident about their ability to participate in local politics. So they're sort of like neutral when it came down to judging their confidence that they can make a difference. So regarding trust, we found that roughly 46% of respondents reported neither agreeing or disagreeing with the statement, "I trust the CNMI's electoral process," although about 25% did report agreeing with the statement. But the mean score for political trust was 3. That's a midpoint. So it's sort of like neutral in a sense. But those are, in a nutshell, those are the results.
I mean, there's so much great data here, more than, as I said, we can cover here. So we do want to point our listeners again to the report. And Leo, I understand you'd like to hear back from our listeners or whoever views the report, what their thoughts on are. What did you actually hope to spark by conducting this survey?
Well, in general, just doing our part to help our community become more aware of the importance and really the force of the media in shaping our decisions and the information we use to make decisions about electing our leaders and participating in our democratic processes. And of course, this survey was disseminated leading up to the midterm election in 2020. I think we closed the survey the week of election day on that Friday, so toward the end of the week. So, and so it was, as we have elections here in the CNMI every 2 years for major political offices, and I think this, if we're able to do this again or look at trend data over time, this tells me that, notwithstanding the pandemic and the restrictions there in terms of moving around, it still tells me that, we know we're a small community. And even in this election cycle, there's a lot of word of mouth communication about potential candidates, policy issues. I think our community is warming up to using other media means like their social media accounts to be able to exchange information or even obtain information about candidates and issues. But I still feel that some of this information, some of the results tell me that we're still very reliant on the person-to-person communication, form of communication to sort of form our opinions about our potential elected leaders or candidates or issues that could potentially fold into some kind of a legislative action. So, but still important to see these results in the context of the historical timeline we're on. We're such a young democracy. We're a little over 40 years old as compared to the United States, who will be they're celebrating their 250th year as a democracy. And throughout that time, media has always been sort of that fourth branch of government, that unofficial fourth branch of power that engages in our three branches of government and in some ways greases the wheel and forces it to operate effectively and efficiently. And I'm hoping that these results sort of give us a sense of where we are at this point in time, in this moment of the historical trajectory we're on in our great experiment of having a covenant agreement with the United States that defines our democracy and how that's working for us. How engaged are we in it? And try to surmise, this doesn't give us all the information, but try to think through maybe some of the barriers that to which, we're not seeing that much participation in both offline and online politics, So just a lot of implications for this subset of the survey. The same could be said for a lot of the other subsets. Again, it's a good start. It's the first, to be conducted of its kind here in the CNMI, and arguably in the Marianas as a whole. I know that Dr. Dalisay and his colleagues, they've done some media surveys in Guam, but this is unique to the CNMI.
Gentlemen, thank you both for your time. Any final thoughts before we go? Francis?
The one thing is, what I forgot to mention earlier was we found in this survey that political engagement was rather low. And it could have been because this is the peak of COVID, 2020. And one of the driving force for this study was to figure out how engaged our residents in the CNMI, and if we found that they're not actually participating a lot in politics, as Leo alluded to there, like what are the barriers that are at play that are preventing them from participating? Or could it have just been that this was COVID and they weren't participating in this election? And so that'd be interesting, but to find out subsequent research study. But if there are truly some barriers that are out there that are hindering engagement in politics, I think that's something that is worth looking at and solving. The one last thing I wanted to mention is that I simultaneously also collected data in Guam, almost the exact survey with the exact same items that were asked, with the exception of news items on Guam, because the media here are different, right? So in the not too distant future, we're going to be producing some comparison studies, like what's going on in Guam and what's going on in CNMI. And so we should be putting those research studies out shortly.
Okay.
And that's all. I just want to thank Leo for the opportunity and the Humanities Council in the Northern Marianas for this opportunity as well. Thank you.
Leo?
So I'm just really happy that, by virtue of conducting this study and disseminating the results and having opportunities like this to engage in the study results, we are increasing media literacy in our community. And, the report that we've generated will forever be a source document to go back to learn more about this moment in time in our history where we are as a community. But one other thought I want to leave everyone with is this should also encourage our community as a whole to support journalism, to be vigilant, right, about the news you consume, and support journalism, support local journalism, because what the results that say our community want more regional news tells me that we rely heavily on local news and those outlets to be able to learn what's happening in the world. We're not reading the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or other news sources outside of the CNMI that could give us regional and national news. So make a point to learn more about our local journalistic outlets and ways that we can support them so they can do their jobs and help us become a stronger democracy here in our Commonwealth. Also, thank you, Catherine, for hosting us, and of course, Dr. Dalisay for leading this project, keeping it disciplined and anchored, and also to our team of academic advisors. Thank you.
Thank you both, gentlemen. Again, the name of the report is Minagahet, Ellet, reporting the truth in the Northern Mariana Islands, and you can find it on the council website at nmhcouncil.org. That's nmhcouncil.org. I'm Catherine Perry, and this has been Your Humanities Half Hour.
Your Humanities Half Hour is a production of the Northern Marianas Humanities Council, funded in part by the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, or recommendations expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.